It's no surprise that the West and the USSR hated each other. It's no surprise that immediately after Berlin fell, the Iron Curtain rose. Yet it is a surprise that there was a plan so ludicrous and dangerous it not only would have caused World War III, but nuclear war. It came from none other than Winston Churchill. This plan was called Operation Unthinkable. Churchill was angry at the amount of countries the Soviets claimed influence over after Nazi Germany fell. He believed that when World War II was finished, that the USSR would have been on the brink of collapse. However, this was not the case, and Churchill did not like this new world. The USSR had begun installing new communist governments in Eastern Europe, and their armies were too far west in Churchill's eyes. Thus, he proposed a solution called Operation Unthinkable, and it was truly unthinkable. The plan was a full-scale Anglo-American conflict against the Russians. It was meant to drive out the Soviet forces from Germany, Poland, and Eastern Europe to counter Russia's ever-growing power. Since it was so over the top, many thought Operation Unthinkable was suicidal. Thus, the plan of total war was quickly ignored by reasonable leaders. Soon after, Churchill was voted out of office for unrelated reasons. Yet what if Operation Unthinkable was put into effect? What if it actually happened? What would be the outcome if such a strange plan was carried out? Well, here is one scenario. The first obstacle the Allied powers, allied as in British and Americans, would have had to overcome is the vast numbers difference between them and the Russians. The Russian force numbered in total of 11 million. 6.5 of which were on the German front. The Soviet armies simply outnumbered the Anglo-American force 2-1. So how would the Allies counter this? Well, the plan was to rearm 100,000 captured German soldiers and revive the destroyed German war machine. This time, however, under Allied control against the Russians. Yet even bringing back the Germans would not be enough to equal the Soviets, so there was another option: nuclear war. Churchill knew about Project Manhattan and how the Americans had the potential to create a nuclear bomb. Keep in mind this was before the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the plan was to harness American nukes to bomb USSR cities, most importantly Moscow, Kiev, and such. In his mind, this would be enough to crush the Soviets into submission and force their retreat, or at least disorient them while the Allied forces swept over Europe. Operation Unthinkable goes into effect. On July 1st, 1945, the Allied powers launch a full-scale military assault against Russian positions. This coalition of British, American, and German forces, 47 divisions in total, cross into communist territory. The fighting is brutal, drawn out, and an upward fight for the Allies. Not only would they need to push past Germany, but into Poland, East Russia, Moscow, or even farther to stop any USSR resistance. The Soviets begin to overtake the Allies, and the Americans decide to bring in the big guns. Diverting nukes that were meant for Japan, the US drops Little Boy on Moscow. The Kremlin and a large portion of the city is destroyed. This catches the Russian forces off guard, and the Allies are able to push closer to Berlin. However, after the shock goes away, the Russians slowly fight back the Americans and British. This goes in part with the fact that the Russians simply outnumbered the Allies and eventually would be able to beat them back. Perhaps a few more nuclear bombs would be dropped on Russia over the next few months, but this would not deter the Soviets. Soon the Russians would invade France and the Allies would retreat to Britain. Soviet V-2 rockets could then strike London. This scenario isn't an 100% prediction, but just judging by the balance of power, armies, and conditions of the time, it's a fair representation of what probably would have occurred. The British and Americans simply weren't in the position to battle the Soviets right after a world war. The Russians had taken half of Europe and installed their own allied governments. That's the reason why Operation Unthinkable was never put into effect, or even considered as an immediate offensive measure. How do you think the world would be if Operation Unthinkable happened? Tell us in the comments. Like us on Facebook, subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.